one whispered pact, one silent decision. And suddenly, the future of the monarchy wasn't being shaped in public, it was being rewritten behind closed doors, where Prince William and Princess Anne allegedly made a move that could erase Queen Camilla from royal history forever. Behind closed palace doors, something shifted, something cold, calculated, and impossible to reverse. The kind of conversation that doesn't just change relationships, it changes destinies. And at the center of it all, Prince William and Princess Anne. Two figures known not for drama but for discipline, not for rebellion but for loyalty. So what happens when those two reach a breaking point? What happens when silence turns into strategy? Because this wasn't sudden. No, insiders say this had been building for years. Small moments, almost invisible. A glance across a dinner table that lasted 1 second too long. A handshake that never happened. A quiet walk through Balmoral where nothing was said but everything was understood. These weren't coincidences, they were signals, patterns, clues that something much bigger was forming beneath the surface. And then came the realization that changed everything. King Charles's health declining. Slowly, quietly, but enough for those watching closely to understand what was coming next. Because in the monarchy, timing is everything. And when the end of one reign begins to approach, the next one doesn't wait. It prepares. That's when Prince William and Princess Anne allegedly reached their unspoken agreement. When King Charles's reign ends, Queen Camilla's ends with it. No transition, no extended influence, no lingering presence behind the throne. Just silence. Think about that. A sitting queen reduced not through scandal, not through public outrage, but through a carefully orchestrated absence. That's not chaos. That's control. And Princess Anne, she wasn't reacting emotionally, she was calculating. Watching as Queen Camilla's influence grew her presence at key events, her role in decisions once governed by tradition and quietly questioning everything. Because in Anne's world, the monarchy isn't about sentiment, it's about structure, about legacy, about rules that were never meant to be rewritten. But according to insiders, Queen Camilla was rewriting them anyway. Not loudly, not recklessly, but subtly. Through appointments, through appearances, through a shift in tone that felt different, more performative, less rooted. And for Princess Anne, that wasn't evolution. That was erosion. And then there was Prince William. For him, this wasn't just institutional. It was personal. Because no matter how many years passed, no matter how carefully the narrative was reshaped, one truth never disappeared. Princess Diana. Her memory, her legacy, her presence still alive in the public's heart. And every time Prince William saw Queen Camilla beside King Charles, wearing symbols that once belonged to something far deeper, something far more sacred, that tension didn't fade. It intensified. Not in public, never in public, but behind the scenes, it became impossible to ignore. And that's when the alliance formed. Not announced, not declared, but understood. Prince William would handle the transition, the public face, the quiet repositioning of the monarchy's future. Princess Anne, she would work in the shadows, restructuring protocols, influencing decisions, rewriting the rules that would determine exactly who remains and who disappears. Because this wasn't about humiliation, it was about permanence, a future where Queen Camilla doesn't exist in power, doesn't exist in influence, maybe doesn't exist in memory the way she once expected. But here's where it gets even more unsettling. Queen Camilla wasn't unaware. No, insiders say she began to feel it. The shift, the distance, the subtle changes in behavior that couldn't be explained but couldn't be ignored either. Conversations becoming shorter, invitations becoming fewer, presence becoming optional. And then came the public illusion, the balcony appearances, the carefully curated smiles, the image of unity that the world was meant to believe. But inside the palace, everything was changing. Offices rearranged, advisors reassigned, protocols quietly rewritten, decisions made without certain voices in the room. And those voices started noticing, because the monarchy doesn't collapse loudly, it shifts quietly. And Queen Camilla, she was no longer at the center of that shift. She was being moved to the edge. And then came the moment that insiders say confirmed everything. A royal tour. Ireland, supposed to be flawless, controlled a perfect display of unity and strength. But something went wrong. Not dramatically, not explosively. Subtly, a speech that didn't land. A crowd that didn't respond. A silence that lasted just a little too long. And in the monarchy, silence is never just silence. It's a message. And Prince William saw it. Princess Anne saw it. The public wasn't rejecting Queen Camilla outright, but they weren't embracing her either. And that was enough. Because if the public could be guided, If perception could be reshaped, then influence could be removed without ever saying a word. And that's when the strategy evolved. Not just removing Queen Camilla from the future, but slowly removing Queen Camilla from the present. But the real question is, when Queen Camilla finally realized what was happening, did she stay silent? The shift didn't explode, it tightened, quietly, relentlessly, and by the time Queen Camilla realized the pattern wasn't accidental, it was already too late to stop it, because what Prince William and Princess Anne had started in whispers was now unfolding in structure and protocol, in decisions that never needed public explanation. The monarchy wasn't confronting Queen Camilla, it was moving around Queen Camilla, and that was far more dangerous. It began with symbolism, the kind that defines power without ever announcing it. Invitations changed, seating arrangements shifted, moments that once guaranteed visibility suddenly placed Queen Camilla just slightly out of frame. Not removed, just repositioned. And in a system built on optics, that subtle repositioning carried weight, because the cameras follow hierarchy, and hierarchy had begun to change. Prince William's presence grew sharper, more central, more deliberate. Princess Anne's influence expanded behind closed doors, shaping ceremonial decisions, guiding conversations, pulling threads that most would never even see. Then came the deeper cut, patronages quietly reassigned. Names that once stood beside Queen Camilla's in official materials began disappearing, replaced not with controversy, but with silence. No announcement, no explanation, just absence. And in that absence, new faces appeared more frequently, more consistently, until the public began to associate those roles with someone else entirely. It wasn't removal, it was replacement, disguised as routine. Inside the palace, the atmosphere shifted from tension to calculation. Staff who once aligned themselves with Queen Camilla started hesitating, watching the direction of influence change in real time. Some stepped back, some adapted. Because loyalty inside the monarchy isn't just emotional, it's strategic. And the strategy was becoming clear. Queen Camilla was no longer inevitable. Queen Camilla was becoming optional. And that's when the internal fracture reached King Charles. The confrontation didn't arrive with ceremony. It arrived with pressure, with questions that demanded answers, with the reality that could no longer be softened or delayed. When King Charles finally faced Prince William, the conversation wasn't about feelings, it was about survival. The monarchy's survival. And Prince William, steady, unflinching, laid out the truth as it had been quietly forming for months. The public sentiment wasn't shifting toward Queen Camilla. The institutional support wasn't solidifying around Queen Camilla. And Princess Anne had already begun reinforcing a future that did not depend on Queen Camilla at all. That moment didn't break loudly. It settled, heavy, inevitable. Because King Charles understood something that made the decision even more devastating. This wasn't rebellion. This was alignment. Structure aligning against sentiment, legacy aligning against love. And when those forces collide inside the monarchy, history has already decided which one survives. So King Charles didn't make a dramatic declaration. King Charles made a quiet withdrawal. Queen Camilla's presence in transition discussions began to fade. Meetings continued without Queen Camilla. Documents moved forward without Queen Camilla's input. Not openly, not aggressively, but definitively. And the realization didn't come through confrontation. It came through absence, through silence, through moments where Queen Camilla expected inclusion and found none. That silence was louder than any argument. And just when the internal structure seemed locked, something unexpected cracked the surface, the leak. A letter. Personal, raw, never meant for public eyes. A message from Queen Camilla that didn't speak like a queen, but like someone cornered. Someone who saw exactly what was happening and refused to disappear quietly. The words didn't just accuse Prince William and Princess Anne of strategy, they exposed the emotional cost of that strategy. The feeling of being tolerated, never fully accepted, always standing in the shadow of something that could never be replaced. And when that letter reached the public, the reaction didn't unify, it divided. Because suddenly, Queen Camilla wasn't just a figure within the monarchy. Queen Camilla became a symbol of something else, of sacrifice, of displacement, of a role that was never fully secure. And for a moment, the narrative wavered. But inside the palace, the response wasn't emotional. It was controlled, containment, damage limitation, reinforcement of the same structure that had already been set in motion. Because once the monarchy decides on direction, it doesn't reverse. It absorbs impact and continues forward. And forward meant one final shift, the future, the focus focus turned deliberately toward the next generation. Names that represented continuity without controversy. Faces that carried legacy without conflict. The narrative wasn't about repairing the past anymore, it was about securing what comes next. And in that future, Queen Camilla's role became harder and harder to define. Not erased overnight, but fading, gradually, systematically, until presence became memory, and memory became footnote. And that's where the tension remains. Because Queen Camilla didn't fall through scandal. Queen Camilla didn't fall through public rejection. Queen Camilla was moved. And in a monarchy built on permanence, being quietly moved out of position may be the most irreversible act of all. But the real question hasn't been answered yet. Because if Queen Camilla has already shown a willingness to speak, to reveal, to push back when the silence becomes too suffocating,